Can I be your best friend, Jude? As you grow and learn, will you remember not my body or my voice, but who I was on the inside? What I dreamed of, what I feared. If I could let myself share these things with you, would that keep you from falling into these traps? Would it keep you whole? Or should I keep a distance from you and attempt some kind of objectivity so I can better protect you?
I'm going higher.
Would that make me a better dad? A stronger dad? Or not strong enough?
Hi, I'm Chuck Braverman, and this is Westdoc. Today we are featuring a film called Sons by first-time documentary feature director and writer Justin Sims. It's produced in association with the National Film Board of Canada, which is a treasure that everybody who's interested in documentaries should learn about. This film is about Justin's son, Jude, and the first half a dozen years of his life, which are photographed by Justin. And it's at a time when masculinity traditions are being contested as never before. And you're going to learn all about it. And let's say hello to Justin Sims.
Hi, Justin. How are you?
Hi, Chuck.
Where are you?
I'm well.
I always ask first, and what part of the world are you exactly?
Yeah, I am currently in St. John's, Newfoundland. So we're on the very east coast of Canada. And we are, in fact, the most eastern spot in North America. So once you hit Newfoundland, you're at the end of the line.
So if a plane is in trouble coming from the east, does it land in Newfoundland first? And that's where,
oh, yes.
Is that the first airport?
Very often. Yep, very often.
So let me say as an intro that I kind of have a background from the National Film Board of Canada. Only in that when I graduated from film school a few weeks ago, I spent the summer in Montreal at Expo and seeing all the new films and meeting all the filmmakers and hanging out at the National Film Board. And I actually was offered a job there. But of course, at the time, there was a little thing going on called the draft and war and all that stuff. And as much as I wanted to work, and especially at the film board, I had to come home. So I've been very much aware of the NFB for many, many years. I've followed them. I've seen a lot of their films. And I'm curious as to what exactly, I know this is obviously a National Film Board film, but what does that mean? Are you an employee of theirs, or are you a freelancer that has a relationship, or how does that work these days with Canadian?
Yeah, no, I'm a freelancer with a relationship. I've been lucky enough to work with the Film Board a handful of times now over the last 10 to 15 years as a filmmaker, but also in other capacities, like as an editor, as a shooter. And yeah, I really love the National Film Board, obviously, and they're an interesting organization. They really hold a unique spot in Canada in terms of our cultural universe. Social political films, and they're not really made with an eye toward having to make money, which I think is very important, and why I think the Film Board really is a jewel in that filmmakers really have the ability to make their film, say what they need to say, and they don't necessarily need to shape that idea around some kind of target financially, which I think is very important for a lot of the films that the Film Board make. I mean, they simply wouldn't get financed anywhere else without having to really mold themselves away from what they probably need to be. So, yeah, the Film Board is wonderful. And so I know that they're in the midst of a new initiative now to kind of turn people on to the fact that the complete library of the film board is available.
What about Americans watching NFB films? I mean, I know how, there certainly is an easy-ish way to watch if you have a VPN. So let's talk about your film Sons. I have to say, I don't know, maybe if I was 20 years old, maybe I wouldn't have appreciated it as much as I really do, because I'm a father. I have two sons myself, grown now, adults. And I found your film really moving, important, well-made, entertaining, enjoyable, emotional, all of the
Thank
things
you so much. Thank
that you want in a film. It's a terrific film. And I strongly advise people to, especially in the United States, to go out of their way to try and see this film. I don't know, are there distribution plans that you're aware of any kind? There's a festival coming up, I know, in Northern California, right?
Yeah, Docklands, yes.
Right.
Yeah, I think right now, well, it's available in Canada on the streaming service. And I think right now it's doing festivals in the United States. And I'm not sure what the plan is for it after that.
I think let's take a look at the trailer right now.
Who do I think I am, anyway, bringing another white male into the world? Another white male protected by the hidden bias in our system. And what makes my kid different from the many before him? What makes me different? Am I different? Is bad male behavior strangling the world in front of our eyes? Or am I just being a pussy? How do I help this kid be a seed and not a bullet? The only answer I can think is masculinity is a chain. Perhaps the first and last thing a father hands down to his son, and his son, and his son.
So, do you want to tell us how this film evolved? Obviously, I love where you start some of the notes about, little did I know when I took my iPhone out 10 minutes after my son was born and I shot. So that, like everybody does that now, right? Mm-hmm, whether it's an iPhone or an Android, you've got the child crying in the mother's arms or whatever in the hospital, and you think, wow, this is the beginning. But you really thought about this and followed through and made a very moving, terrific film. So how did this evolve? How did this happen?
Well, I guess as I say in the movie, my son was born right as Trump was moving into the Oval Office. And so his and my first years as a dad were parallel to Trump 1. And that was a time I'm sure you can recall where there was a lot on the go in terms of masculinity and dominance. And just the whole vibe that was in the air back then. And there was also at the time, there was a real raft of school shootings. And they really impacted me, obviously, having a newborn son. And I really would research them and read about them. And what I found was that not every shooter had the same story, and that some of them came from very loving homes and very well-intentioned parents. And it seemed to make no difference in terms of like losing them to the dark side. And so I was looking at my own infant son, and I was just really worried about the environment that he was being born into, and how do we keep these, because it is true, as I'm sure you can recall, like when you hold your son for the first time, it's very powerful, And what really struck me was how worried I was about the world suddenly, because as I kind of talk about in the film, up until that point, I've always followed the news and been somewhat of a political animal, but I was also very all about myself, and I was pretty typical in that sense. So it was only until I became a dad that I realized I had something at stake finally. And so a lot of the stuff that I probably should have been thinking about a long time before, I started to think about what makes a good man, or what makes a good human being, and am I a good human being? Like, what will my son see when he looks at me living my life? Like, I want my kid to have empathy, but am I an empathetic person? Do I live my life in an empathetic manner? These were just questions that I started to think about and write about. And then I started to think about my own dad. Like, I'm an only child, as my son is, and really kind of thought about my childhood and watching my dad. And so I started to talk to him about my grandfather, about how my dad sort of learned masculinity, and it was just very interesting conversations. And at the same time, the world kept evolving, and everything has kind of a pop culture label now, but you kind of saw the origins of the manosphere and the rise of Elon Musk and the attitudes out there around misogyny and sexism, and then to think about the capitalistic kind of patriarchy that we've all been born into, and how do you illustrate that for a young mind? This was all the kind of stuff that was going through my mind at the time, and I started to think that there was probably enough there to make a movie about this. And I was very interested at the time in trying to make something that only I could make. I was really moved by a lot of work at the time that was very unique, in that it wasn't something that any other filmmaker could make. And so a big part of this was turning the camera on myself, which I had never really done to any significant extent, and opening up the entirety of my life, my past, my partner, my son, my mom, my dad, and just turning the camera on myself, which was very tough. Like, for all, it was very hard. And you talk about the iPhone. Like, I was, where I'm a filmmaker, obviously, and because of the technology, I have so many videos of him on my phone through every stage. And like, sometimes I would just kind of like shoot him for like a minute or two and just kind of sit there. And then I realized that like the iPhone stuff that I shot, that could be a real part of the movie. Like, that could be really layered throughout as we watch Jude, that's my son's name, as we watch him grow, and that could be impactful somehow. But then I got sort of lost in the rabbit hole of like, every time that I would reach for my phone, if I saw him do something, I was always kind of cognizant of, is it the filmmaker reaching for the phone because this could work in the movie? Or is this a dad reaching for the phone because I want to have a memory of my son? And sometimes I would struggle with that. I would really struggle with that and not take out my phone, wouldn't let myself, and other times forcing myself to take out the phone. So it was a real psychological experience making this, and that's essentially where it all came from. I'm not a journalist by trade, so I was not necessarily going about this trying to be objective. I really like essay films, like the films of Chris Marker, the films of Alan Perliner, and I was trying to really emulate that kind of thing, of turning the camera on yourself, making your own story the story.
I wanted to add one comment about what you said about, picking up your iPhone and, do you have, are you shooting in too much or whatever? My regret, I feel like it's the old saying about the shoemaker doesn't have shoes for his family. My regret is that I didn't film my kids enough. Yeah, I've got some great pictures up on the wall over here of my kids when they were 10 or 12 years old, whatever. And I've got kids with them. I mean, pictures of them as babies, but I wish I had 10 times more pictures than what I have. And,
sure.
And I think for you and for this generation, I think it's even more important that you get that video off the iCloud or wherever it is and make hard, copies of the important stuff in several formats. So, I can't tell you enough, like, how difficult it is to find good pictures. So,
a filmmaker told me one time that we all have to be our own documentarians, and that we should all kind of take more of a responsibility to document our lives, be it photographs or journals or like some kind of timeline. And I think that's true. I think that's very true.
I don't generally, as a generalization, I'm not crazy about films that people make about themselves and feature themselves and break the fourth wall. But I must say, I think your film really works for what it is. How is you doing now? And and what does he think of the film? And how has that affected anything?
He's well. Yeah. He is coming upon the end of grade 3. And he likes the film. I mean, he really likes the parts that he's actually in. When it kind of moves away from him and we're interviewing other people and stuff, he's not as crazy about that. But he likes it. And I am curious myself about how his relationship to this film might evolve over time. Certainly my hope is that when he's an adult, he will value it in the way that I wish that he would, which is as a real kind of time capsule about him and his family and where he comes from and who his mom and dad are. And that a lot of the stuff that I am wrestling with in the movie, I hope that is a form of modeling for him somehow.
I'm still curious about the relationship to the film board. At what point in the filmmaking process did you approach the film board, and how much were they involved? And there's an awful lot of credits in there with a bunch of executive producers, and I'm just curious as to how that relation, especially being outside of Montreal or Toronto, being in Newfoundland, how did that work?
Well, the film board has like regional offices across the country, and I was lucky enough to have a relationship with Annette Clark, who used to work at the film board. She's retired now, but she had produced a couple of my other film board documentaries. And so I went to her very early in this. I remember very early. And I told her what I had been thinking about and what kind of movie it would be. And she put it into development. And so the film board gave us a small amount of money to shoot a couple of research interviews and write a little outline or treatment. And then we applied to the film board for production money, and which we were ultimately successful. So that's a pretty standard way that it works when approaching the film board. And the reason that there's so many producer credits on there is that we were actually working, as you will see in the film, we were actually working on this for many years. And so there were, people retired and people quit, and there were regime changes and whatnot. So we were lucky enough to survive across all of that. So, and everyone at the film board has been really great. I mean, it's a filmmaker's dream, really. They have a great team, a great marketing team, great distribution team, and they give you the time and space to make the film. And they seem to understand that the shortest line between no film and a film that's really good is to really just support the vision of the filmmaker and not work against it or second guess it, but really to invest in it. And so this has all worked out really well for a film over all of the years that we were making it. There were points when I wanted to quit. I mean, I wasn't sure that it was working, and I wasn't sure that I was working. I wasn't sure that I was an interesting enough protagonist. And I got really, it was an up and down process in terms of my confidence around it. And I think it was because the camera was on me, and I found it hard to balance that with my kind of objective filmmaking instincts. So it was a constant battle. And but then I worked with a wonderful editor, Andrew McCormack, who's a colleague of mine. And he really shaped it into what you see, into the story that it is. So I got really lucky here, I think.
How busy can you be as a filmmaker in Newfoundland? Is an ongoing film industry to any size?
There is, yeah. We've got 2 nationally broadcast kind of drama series are shooting right now, and we have a pretty healthy independent feature film environment and community. And certainly if you want to stay in St. John's, and I think I'm an example, it kind of helps if you can do more than one thing. So I'm also an editor, I'm also an AD, and I'm a filmmaker and a writer. So the more varied skills that you have for those times when you're in between your own movies, that can definitely help. And so we have a very unique film community here in that sense, right? That the costume designer is also a visual artist, or the sound recordist is a director, so there's a lot of overlap like that. It's good.
What do you do with your son today? I mean, here's another unfair question to make him, to help him be the man that he should be and not be the macho jerk,
Well, he just recently turned 9, and so it's a lot easier now to have those actual conversations, because when he was really young, 2, 3, 4, there's not a lot of room in there for some of these concepts. And I mean, as a dad yourself, I'm under no illusion that I can really mold him into something. He will become whoever he will become. And I think this is a lot of what I talk about in the film, the best investment I can make in him, especially now that he's living with me and we spend so much time together. The best investment that I can make in him is how I live my own life, and how he sees sees me living my life. And, speaking of Trump, he came home from school shortly after the election, and he was all in a tizzy about that Trump had won. And apparently the kids on the playground at school had been talking to each other about it. And so Trump, even among the 9-year-olds, has become this mythological kind of figure. And so we just try to be transparent with him and open about why what's going on is going on. Like we've been last week trying to explain to him what tariffs are and why they're important and why this is bad. And just trying to explain to him why myself and Willow, why we have our beliefs and why what we believe is important. And you hope that he absorbs that. And like so much of it is about your own relationship to the world. Because when I think about my own dad, I think a lot about him coming home from work and what he would talk about at work and how he and I would hang out on the weekends and stuff. And, it was all watching. It was all watching him. And then it would extend and watching the world around me. And I think my kid, like all kids out there, they're little watchers. They're always watching. They're always absorbing. And so I try to put him around as much positive stuff as I can. You know what I mean? Even if it's very simple, even if it's me like, like the other day, for example, a new student joined him in class, and I think he's from Syria, and he doesn't speak any English, and he really likes food. I think they got sat together at the same table, and so we were just kind of having a chat about all the ways you can make this new kid feel welcome, and about how scary this must be for the new kid. And what would it be like if you went to a school and you didn't speak the language? And little moments like that, I think, are what I look for. And I should even say look for, because they're always presenting themselves. I mean, how you choose to have a bad day, how you choose to reflect that, how you choose to reflect your frustration. I think that's all ways you can teach. And I was unprepared to be a teacher, and I'm trying to grow into the role. But it's always very small steps, very simple steps. It isn't like, okay, kids, sit down. I want to talk to you about empathy. It's more of giving half your sandwich to the guy on the street, and like not saying anything about it, not saying, hey kid, wasn't I empathetic for just giving that guy my half a sandwich? You just do it and you let them look at it.
Thanks very much for being a guest on Westdoc. I really enjoyed your film, and I hope it gets worldwide distribution through National Film Board of Canada. And if anybody's watching, you can figure out a way to go to nfb.ca and watch the film. And I hope you enjoy it. Thank you, Justin.
Thank you very much, Chuck. I really appreciate it.